Republicans and Democrats turn against Governor J.B. Pritzker's mask mandate and the conviction of Alderman Patrick Daley Thompson in our Spotlight Politics. Here with all that and more, Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz. So, gang, let's start with the politics of Governor J.B. Pritzker lifting the indoor state mask mandate on. Actually, that's not the right one at all. Let's start with Chicago's health commissioner hinting that the city's mask mandate could end when the state drops its rule on February 28th, depending on the metrics. Take a look.
I want people to understand that we're not just choosing a date, we're going based on when we're there. But as I said, if the difference is a few days to help not have people be confused and have things be straightforward, my expectation is we would be able to go along with that. So I think next week, when we stand up and we look at where things are, we'll be able to give a more definitive answer.
So, Heather, are the metrics at a level in the city to drop the indoor state mask mandate?
No.
In the city?
Chicago today moved into substantial risk of transmission, which is down from high and then very high. So the city is certainly making progress. But Dr. Arwady and Mayor Lori Lightfoot said the city would have to have at least 3 of its 4 main COVID tracking metrics in the low risk or lower risk status. And Chicago only has 1, so we're not quite there yet. Whether that means Chicago will not move to lift its mask mandate when the state does, as you heard from Dr. Arwady, maybe not, we'll be tracking it.
And Amanda, is the pressure on to make a political decision versus a medical decision?
Well, I think you cannot separate the two at this point in time, particularly with what we're seeing in terms of masks in schools, fights, sometimes violence, school board, parents fighting with one another. So clearly this is something that has become political. And I think one of the issues is you can say we've got to look to the science, but of course this is a pandemic. Nobody quite knows. We know a lot more than we did, early on in 2020, but nobody really knows where it's going to go, what it will turn next. So some of the science is really difficult here. That's where I think you have, yes, pressure on the city of Chicago to lift that mask mandate, going along with the city and going along with the rest of the state, and sort of what you heard from the doctor saying, we're going to be looking at the metrics, but if it's a matter of a percentage point or 2, then maybe go with the state so as to not confuse people.
And, Paris, once people start to hear that the mask mandate is going to be rolled back coming up, do people just go ahead and start dropping the masks? Is the horse already out of the barn?
Well, in Chicago, I haven't seen people drop their masks indoor yet. I've seen a lot of compliance. I haven't seen a lot of trouble. It goes to the sort of the fortitude of Chicagoans. But public opinion polling still shows a little over majority support for mask mandates. So I think once the mask mandate goes away, you'll probably see a good amount of people still decide to wear masks indoors. Some people are still not ready to take off that mask. And by the way, the CDC said the country wasn't ready to shed the mask yet, but now we see that they're meeting to possibly revise that. You saw Governor Pritzker and other blue state governors announced dropping these mask mandates, which really, to Amanda's point, kind of underscores the political ramifications here. I really do think in the Democratic Party, with midterms coming up, they just don't want this whole question over masks and mandates hanging over their head as a political issue, as the dominant political issue in these campaigns, because those get really, really messy.
And of course, as we discussed earlier in the broadcast, a bipartisan legislative oversight panel rejects Governor Pritzker's attempt to reintroduce the emergency mask mandate in schools across the state. Heather, tell us about this panel and that vote yesterday.
Well, it is a panel of 12 lawmakers, and their job is very wonky, but it is essentially to make sure that state agencies are issuing rules that make sense and are appropriate. So what happened was that Governor Pritzker's office asked that committee to basically reintroduce the rule, giving the Illinois Department of Public Health the authority to enforce that mask mandate in schools across the state. And 9 of those 12 legislators balked. They said, look, there's an outstanding court case that's being appealed right now. We don't know whether this rule will be upheld for 24 hours, 48 hours, maybe not even that. So they just said, let's let this court case play out, and then maybe we can come back. But that just created chaos, because that meant that there was no mask mandate for schools. So dozens of school districts across the state overnight notified parents that masks would no longer be required. So today, more students than at any point before March 2020 went to school today without wearing a mask.
Which can be a scary prospect for some parents. Obviously, not everybody feels the same way about this. Amanda, has Pritzker lost members of his own party on this?
Well, so first of all, he says that there is still a mask mandate in place that any of the districts that weren't party to that lawsuit should still be abiding by. And this does get wonky again, but what we're talking about in terms of this panel is an emergency rule put forward by the Illinois Department of Public Health. He says, wait, I still have an executive order that remains in effect. So he still wants schools to abide by that. To word of one of your earlier questions, it seems as if for many districts, the horse is out of the barn, and there isn't a strict legal ruling on it. So it is very murky, and that is why, yes, Brandis, he did sort of lose members of his own party on this one. They can point to the questions with the temporary restraining order, the appeal that the Attorney General has put forward and should be heard sooner than later, for saying we don't have the ability to move forward with this emergency rule. We shouldn't be doing that again right now. I will add again, emergency rule, we are a couple of years into the pandemic. So one could also ask the legislature, where have you been? Why has the General Assembly not passed laws to deal with this rather than relying on the executive branch to continually take emergency action this deep in?
So, Paris, what happens next? What are we waiting on? Something else, someone else to make a decision?
Well, whatever the final arbiter of this mask mandate is, it just depends on who you talk to. So some of the lawyers on the right who have fought this say, hey, that JCAR committee, they ruled, that's it. It doesn't matter what the appellate court rules. But Governor Pritzker and Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul and other Democrats say, no, if the appellate court overturns the Sangamon County Court ruling, then that governor's executive order is back in play. It's his legal right to issue that executive order, and the mask mandate is still on. But as Amanda said, the cat is out of the bag. Either way, whatever the decision is, you're going to see legal challenges, and no one's going to agree on what the final ruling is here. But you know, the cat's out of the bag. And now this is on the backs of school administrators, principals, school boards to deal with this. The whole point of the statewide school mask mandate was to take that responsibility away from them so there wouldn't be this confusion and so they wouldn't have to deal with some of the vitriol and the confusion and chaos that comes with it. Now they are dealing with that. So I really don't know how you put that cat back in the bag.
And school administrators have had a ton to deal with figuring out how to educate students during a pandemic and to do so safely. Let's go to court. Patrick Daley Thompson became the 37th alderperson since 1969, y'all, to be convicted of a federal crime. Heather, remind us of the counts and his possible punishment.
Well, he was convicted on 7 counts, 5 counts of filing false tax returns, 2 counts of lying to federal bank regulators. He could face up to 30 years in prison on each of those 2 lying to federal regulators. He could also face 3 years each for each of those false tax returns. He's likely to get less because he has no criminal history and it was a white collar crime. I have no doubt that his attorneys, when he is sentenced, will ask for probation, but he is facing serious jail time. And a little bit of breaking news, just a couple of minutes ago, the Chicago City Clerk's office posted his official resignation letter. He is no longer the 11th Ward alderman.
Heather Sharon steady on the case for us. So Paris, another convicted alderman's attorney, recently argued before a judge that prison time doesn't actually act as a deterrent because, as we know, lots of elected officials in this state have gone to prison. And so sending them to prison isn't really working. It's not curbing political corruption. Sad but true?
Sad but true, but also what's not being a deterrent here is the fact that the feds, if you look at these political corruption cases, they bat nearly 1,000. The adage is you just don't beat the feds. So knowing that, it's very confusing. There are a lot of questions as to why Patrick Daley Thompson would take this to trial. It looked like a pretty cut and dried case. Obviously, the jury didn't buy their defense. And most of the defense attorneys, when they get cases like this, their first advice to their client is, look, my job is not to make you innocent. My job is to limit the damage here. And they usually suggest striking a plea deal. It's really curious as to why he wouldn't strike a plea deal into this, because he could have perhaps avoided prison time. Now he paid all these legal fees and he likely is going to get prison time. And then you look in the context of this Washington Federal Savings Bank that's now defunct, and it's subject to massive federal investigations, other separate federal cases here. Maybe Patrick Daley Thompson knew something about this bank. I mean, he was getting loans with like little expectation to pay them off. and maybe he had information, maybe he didn't, or maybe it's just hubris that these public officials think they're going to be the one. Because if you look at Carrie Austin, looks like she's going to trial. Ed Burke is obviously going to trial, but in that case, he's got $11 billion in campaign funds that are paying his lawyers, so he has nothing to lose there. Patrick Daley Thompson had a lot to lose. He's got a young family. He doesn't have that kind of campaign money to pay these lawyers, and now he's looking at the prospect of prison. It just doesn't make sense why these public officials, A, continue to engage in this kind of behavior, but B, don't take the easier way out.
No, I mean, apparently they believe in their own presumed innocence, especially if you've got $11 billion.
Actual figure, actual number.
That's a legit number,
zeros.
everybody. I mean, obviously we're experts. So once someone on city council is convicted of a felony, they lose their seat. Heather, you just mentioned this a minute ago. Of course, Mayor Lori Lightfoot is now tasked with replacing former Alderman Patrick Daley Thompson. Will she appoint an Asian American to that seat, as both caucuses, the Latino and Black caucus ward remaps call for?
Well, she has 60 days to make this decision. There is no doubt that she will be under intense pressure to make this her first appointment to the city council. Somebody who can represent a redrawn 11th ward, which would unite all of Chinatown along with parts of McKinley Park and Archer Square to make a ward which will have a majority of Asian voters, the first in Chicago's history. Whether she'll do that, I don't know, but she will definitely be getting a lot of phone calls, a lot of emails, a lot of advice, because whoever she does pick will have a leg up, a head start on the 2023 aldermanic elections, which are just about a year away, if you can believe that.
I don't like to make predictions, but I am going to predict in this case. Yes, there's so much pressure to appoint an Asian American to that seat. So I'm going to guess she's going to. Who that'll be, we can't say.
Okay, well, we've got 60 days for her to let us know. So Governor J.B. Pritzker has pardoned 162 people so far this year, but one stands out in particular, a politically connected arsonist who has become a fire chief. Amanda, tell us more about this man who got the pardon and why he got it, but also the fallout from this appointment.
So there is going to, I expect, be a lot of fallout here. This is a news story that reports about Drain Simmons. He is now a fire chief, but way back in the 90s, he had actually been convicted of arson, pleaded guilty, in fact, to an arson charge, which of course is something that you don't necessarily want or expect out of somebody who's supposed to be protecting residents from fire. And at that time, he was serving as a volunteer firefighter, actually. He is the son of a former mayor of the town of which he is now fire chief. That's Prairie du Pont. So you're thinking southwestern Illinois, vaguely south of St. Louis on the Illinois side of Missouri versus, of course, the Missouri side. So why exactly the governor pardoned him and thereby allowed him to rise to this local office to which he aspired, we don't really know. There's a lot about the pardoning process and the prisoner review board that remains concealed and outside of public purview. The governor hasn't said much, but he certainly is coming under fire for doing so, given this man's political connections and just questions about, in general, the criminal justice system. And again, the notion of having a fire chief who, in addition to arson, has had many other struggles with the law.
So, Paris, this could be a turnaround story, right? There's a lot that we don't know here. So there's a lot that we could learn about him, or it could just be a matter of political connections. What do you think is going on here politically?
Yeah, I mean, it could have been, that he fell in love with firefighting after he went through that several years ago. But there certainly you could be the subject of political attack ads, especially if you consider the fact that most Republicans and whoever wins the Republican primary looks to use crime as perhaps the number one thing that they want to hit incumbent Governor J.B. Pritzker on. This might kind of sort of fit in with that, maybe crime, maybe political cronyism and things like that. It would certainly seem to have all the ingredients for that. But, I think we should take a step back and figure out, who this guy really is and what's really going on.
And of course, speaking of Republicans running for governor, Richard Irvin just got a nice 8-figure donation, not quite $11 billion, but a big donation by the state's wealthiest man. Heather, does this surprise you that Ken Griffin is backing Richard Irvin, or is it just the worst kept secret in Illinois politics?
Yes, it was absolutely the worst kept secret in Illinois politics. It would have been more shocking if he had not made a massive campaign contribution to Richard Irvin. And it clearly sets up sort of a battle of the billionaire versus the billionaire's favored candidate. Of course, JB Pritzker has said he is willing to spend as much as it takes to win a second term. And this is Ken Griffin's signal that he will also help Richard Irvin however he can with his massive fortune to really sort of give him a run for his money in a potential general election. First, Richard Irvin has to make it through the GOP primary, and that's no small task, I think.
Yeah, it's not a very limited field. There's quite a few folks running for that one. Paris, does Irvin have a Trump problem?
Well, I think, as Heather said, he has a number of challenges that depend on whether you're in the primary or in the general. So in the primary, it still appears that the base of the Republican Party is most activated in the Trump wing, and that would hold true in Illinois as in any other state. And Irvin might not excite that base the way some of the other candidates. If he gets through the primary, he's got a problem in that, the Pritzker campaign will connect him to Ken Griffin, saying that he's going to be the puppet of a billionaire. And then they're connecting that also to Bruce Rauner, former Governor Bruce Rauner, because Ken Griffin was a big funder of Bruce Rauner. And no doubt they'll probably try to connect him to Trump as well, just by being a Republican. So it's going to be a very complicated, squiggly line that he's going to have to walk.
Paris, with all the squiggly lines and the $11 billion. Amanda, 30 seconds. Illinois has a new legislative inspector general. How long did it take to fill this position?
Well, we had known since July that the last inspector general was going to leave. She officially stepped down really only at the start of January 2022, but this has been a long-running fight. And what's interesting here is that Democrats went on their own to appoint somebody that you want to have buy-in from both parties, and bypassed a citizens committee that was supposed to give approval to whoever this would be. So Illinois now does have a legislative inspector general, somebody to watch over the General Assembly, but I think any decisions that this inspector general makes may come under scrutiny by the process that it took to get the inspector general in that position.
By the way, 7 months and still no inspector general in the city of Chicago, and no signs of any movement on that whatsoever, which is pretty baffling.
And that spotlight, thanks to Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz.